Scotland is where golf comes from, a game that shows us the worst aspects of our lives, of ourselves. Potato-faced men in yellow pants riding electric carts in search of a white ball in tall grass and whacking it into a body of water and cursing God's creation, and then sitting in a clubhouse and getting soused on mint juleps and complaining about the income tax. Thank God I realized that immortality is no substitute for life itself. I missed an opportunity at early death in 1962 when, on a straight stretch in Isanti County on a 2-lane highway, I got my 56 Ford up to 100 miles per hour and a pickup truck suddenly eased out of a driveway up ahead and onto the highway. In a split second, I swerved to go behind him, and it was a good choice, but he didn't see me and try to back up. Otherwise, he and I would have been forever joined in a headline. Anyway, I'd done nothing worth immortalization. Just introspective stuff. Quote, he looked out the window and saw the reflection of his own pale face against the drifted snow. She was gone like everyone else, end of quote. A few years later, I almost died young again when I bought a king-size mattress from a furniture warehouse and tied it to the roof of my car with a piece of twine, and it blew off as I drove home on the freeway. And I pulled over and ran back to rescue it, and a big rig blew past me, blasting his horn. A memorable thing, the Doppler effect of a semi-horn doing 70 a few feet away. In 1983, my brother Philip and I canoed into a deep cavern in Devil's Island on Lake Superior, attracted by the dancing reflections on the cavern ceiling, and paddled way in until we couldn't go farther, and then paddled out. Just as the wake of an oar boat a mile away came crashing into the cavern. Waves that would have smashed us to a pulp, and instead we sat in the canoe and watched the waves pounding into the cavern and said nothing, there being nothing to say. And eventually I turned 50, which is too old to die young. Whenever I relive those close call moments, all regrets vanish, all complaints evaporate. I survived to do hundreds of shows, and when the audience laughs, it feels like a good reason to go on living. And I've come to relish writing more and more, especially after the delete key was invented, which ranks with Gutenberg's movable type in the annals of human progress. Back in the typewriter age, we had liquid whiteout, but delete enables you to remove whole pages of your own gloomy nonsense. I gave up dark writing for the simple reason that it fails to hold the interest of the writer. It's boring. Gloom is just like carbuncles. Yours is the same as your uncle's, whereas the hilarious is wildly various, like the wildlife found in the jungles. I left Minnesota and friends and family in 2018 after Minnesota Public Radio, fearful of a shakedown scheme by 2 former employees, threw me out in the street, a miserable mistake on their part, and at 76, I needed to put it behind me, and so we took up residence in Manhattan, where I enjoy anonymity and Ginny loves the city and our daughter is nearby, so it was a smart move all around. And when I stood in that gym watching her and my fellow autists leaping and dancing to the hits of my youth played by a man with a rope coming out of his head, I was so happy it made me cry, just as I do in church when we sing about the awesome wonder of the world and the stars and the thunder. Oh Lord, how great thou art. And we old angsty Anglicans stand and raise our hands in the air at this Baptist revival hymn. We, the overachievers, transformed into storefront charismatics. It's quite a sight. It happened one morning with the chorus, and I will raise you up, and I will raise you up, and I will raise you up on the last day. It was Easter morning, brass players up in the choir loft, ladies with big hats, and when the clergy processed up the aisle, the woman swinging the censer looked like a drum major leading the team to victory over death. Resurrection is not something we Christians talk about in the same way we talk about our plans for retirement, but it's right there in the Nicene Creed and in Luke's Gospel. The women come to the tomb and find the stone rolled away, and the mysterious strangers say, quote, "Why seek ye the living among the dead?" End of quote. This all hit me when we sang, "And I will raise them up." I raised my right hand and imagined my long-gone parents and brother and grandson and aunts and uncles coming into radiant glory. And I was surprised by faith, and I wept. My mouth went rubbery. I couldn't sing the consonants. I stayed for the benediction, slipped out a side door onto Amsterdam Avenue, and headed home. Without the resurrection, St. Michael's would be just an association of nice people with good taste in music, but when it hits you, what you've actually subscribed to, it can blow your head off. Me, the author, standing and weeping among stockbrokers and journalists and lawyers, for God's sake. This never happens at meetings of the American Academy of Arts and Letters up on 155th Street. Writers and composers and painters and architects do not stand singing, moved to tears. It simply does not happen. It happens at St. Michael's on 100th Street. I don't know if they do this at All Souls Unitarian over on the east side. I think maybe they think about doing it. But hymns about inclusivity and tolerance and justice that leave divinity out of it, except as a beam of light or a rainbow or a starry sky, I'm sorry, but that doesn't make New York adults raise their arms and weep. The Lord is great indeed. He is here among us, from the public housing projects to the castles of Central Park West. Amid the honking and double parking of delivery trucks, God is here and we are his. We of the Academy, and also kids on the spectrum jumping and dancing, this cheerful thought can get you through some dark days. My mother knew deep grief when she was 6 years old. A little sister died of scarlet fever. And soon after, her mother died, and Grace lost the memory of her mother, couldn't recall her voice, her manner. Stared at snapshots of Marion trying to bring her to life, and it makes me happy to think of them reunited in happiness. There endeth my sermon. Go in peace. Chapter 2, the mitral valve. A few years after my parents died, I learned that I was lucky to exist at all. Grace and John married in scandal in 1937 after a 5-year engagement during the Depression, when Grace was a nurse in Minneapolis and John was trapped on the family farm 30 miles north. His mother needed him, his father having died. And then one day, the double team of horses he was driving, hauling a wagon load of cow manure to spread on a field a quarter mile away, bolted and galloped in a panic toward home, and he hauled on the reins but couldn't control them. They raced into the farmyard, and the turn was too sharp, and the wagon overturned in the ditch. The hitch snapped, the horses stopped, exhausted, and John, though shaken and shat upon, was so elated by survival that he wrote Grace a long, passionate letter describing what had happened. A fine passage of narrative prose, and then decided to deliver it in person and borrowed his brother's Bob's model. Borrowed his brother Bob's Model A and drove to the city, and the two sweethearts reconnoitered. 3 months later, she learned she was pregnant, and she told John, and they had to face her father, who was a devout evangelical and therefore furious, and denounced them for succumbing to temptations of the flesh against the teachings of their loving Savior who gave his life for them. Had he ordered her to a home for unwed mothers, my brother Philip might have been adopted by a wealthy family in Wayzata and gone to Yale, and the two lovers driven apart by righteous condemnation. But Grandpa was forced to forgive them, knowing full well that his own Marion McKay in Glasgow had been 3 months pregnant when he married her. This transgression was why they came to America, to escape the shame. To keep his secret safe, he had to forgive his fellow sinners. So Grace and John found a judge and married, and 5 years later, as she was sending John off to war in the drama of saying farewell, perhaps forever, with their little boy and girl asleep in the next room of their rented house in Anaka, in her emotional turmoil, she got careless and conceived me, an unnecessary child. And in August 1942, I emerged at Dr. Mork's maternity hospital on Ferry Street in Anoka. We won the war, and Dad built us a house in the country, and I went to school and became a writer and wrote a magazine article about a radio show, and then started one of my own. I, who had no social skills at all, became a close personal friend of thousands of radio listeners, all of them invisible. A brethren boy brought up to practice alienation as a spiritual duty, who learned how to make listeners feel reassured. A marvelous fake. If you wrote this as a novel, nobody would believe a word of it. Not even the or if. And then comes the kicker. By the time I turned 59 and was due to die, the heart-lung machine had been invented and perfected, which made it possible for Dr. Tom Orzulak at Mayo Clinic to cut open my chest and sew up the mitral valve. A couple months later, I went back for an echocardiogram and saw on the screen the gray silhouette of a fluttering flower, my repaired valve opening and closing, proof of how lucky I was. These little petals, once inaccessible, now operating on all pistols, thanks to skilled intervention by men and women who do not doze off in math and physics and biology, as I did, but paid close attention and felt a vocation. I am no spring chicken. Chickens don't get echocardiograms. But I feel obligated in my remaining years to do sufficient good work to justify the men and women in white going to all that trouble, and a couple decades later, by God, I'm still trying. Longevity was a beautiful, undeserved gift. I, having smoked whole fields of tobacco and consumed barrels of alcohol while leading the sedentary life of a writer, a large ashtray full of butts by the typewriter. Later, I survived a stroke when a blood clot got blown into my brain a millimeter from the wiring that enables speech and mobility. A little clot that would have made me a mumbling, stumbling dummy, but it missed the bullseye. I put away alcohol when I was 60 because I often drank myself stupid, and I dreaded the prospect of AA and sitting in a circle of folding chairs in a church basement on Tuesday nights with other men talking about our emotionally distant fathers. So I gave up Glenlivet for ginger ale, and my head cleared up, and I could sit at a keyboard in the morning, not hungover, and produce interesting sentences. A sensible man chooses work over drink, though I'd taken to drink because it seemed, thanks to Fitzgerald, Hemingway, Faulkner, Cheever, etc., that inebriation was a badge of authenticity for a writer. You poured a tumbler full of bourbon to pacify the demons who animated your genius. But why seek more stupor when you've more than enough to begin with? And I discovered, as so many others have, that it's easy to stop drinking so long as you don't drink. Repeat that sentence, dear reader. Drinking is the problem, so don't. Enjoy communion wine on Sunday, and let that be the end of it. And the reader pokes her head up from under the dining room table where I am writing this book, and she says, "Pardon me, but we're in the second chapter and I don't have any idea where you're going with this. Is this going to be a confessional or a book about cheerfulness? My parents were major fans of yours. Me, not as much, though I like the detective in the Acme building trying to find the answers to life's persistent questions. I did love the story about your grandma singing you to sleep with the song about little kids freezing to death in the woods. That was good. And the limerick about the old man of Bay Ridge who cried out, 'Son of a bitch, I got up in the night and on came the light and I find I have pissed in the fridge.' But otherwise there was an awful lot of meh, if you know what I mean. But don't let me interrupt you. You're busy writing, which at your age is pretty amazing. So I'll let you get on with it. I just wanted you to realize that you're not alone. I'm here. And to be honest with you, and why not? The God stuff goes right by me, and urging people to be cheerful flies in the face of reality. So if this is meant ironically, why not come out and say so?" "It's not," I said, but she was gone. I was so taken aback, I didn't get a good look at her. She had a pleasant voice and spoke very clearly, like maybe she taught fourth grade. Fantastic. Life is good. I arise early and make coffee and sit down to write for a few hours as I am doing now, and then Ginny walks in and sits on my lap and I put my arms around her, and thanks to my evangelical upbringing that condemned carnal pleasure, I'm thrilled by this modest physical contact. I scratch her upper back between the shoulder blades and she sighs a long legato sigh. She says, "Don't talk to me. I just woke up." So I don't. But what is there to say? The polar ice cap is melting. People are shooting each other for no good reason. Authoritarianism is raising its horny head. People sit in Congress who 30 years ago couldn't have been elected county weed inspectors. And yet the quotidian pleasures are forever beautiful because on my third try, I married well. She is the sister of my younger sister's high school classmate who gave me her phone number. One lucky phone call changed my life. I met her in New York City in the spring of 1992. We had lunch at Doc's on Broadway and 90th after she returned from an orchestra tour of Southeast Asia and Japan. She'd left Minnesota in her late teens to live the life of a freelance violinist in New York, knowing that in order to play Brahms and Tchaikovsky, you may need to live in a little walk-up apartment with roommates, where drug addicts doze in the vestibule overnight and the cockroaches are the size of hummingbirds. But she loved classical music and took whatever gig she could get, the 3 tenors one week, then riding a bus around mid-America to play one-nighters of La Boheme, subbing in Broadway pits and during periods of near poverty but not giving up. She learned to live on ramen noodles when necessary and took long walks to ward off the blues. And she was very upbeat about it all. She was 35 now and didn't regret a bit of it. This was all quite new to me. I found poverty demeaning. She did not. To her it had purpose. I found this fascinating. She came to my 50th birthday party in August. We married 3 years later. Our daughter was born in 1997, and now, thanks to God's mercy and modern medicine, and despite my prodigious bad habits, here we sit on the front porch of a little house on a cove of the Connecticut River, drinking coffee, watching a family of foxes playing tag on the lawn. Our daughter Maya asleep upstairs. A quiet Sunday, August 7th, 2022. My 80th birthday. No fuss, no fluffery, no gifts. Life is the gift. No birthday cake. It might burn the house down. I feel like the luckiest man in my age bracket. Diligence is all well and good, but thank God for wild good luck. The best and the brightest studied math and made careers in the fast-moving frontiers of science where obsolescence sets in around age 35. And I did a radio show that, because it was nostalgic, defied change. And thus did the turtle outrun a great many hares. It's August. I now am fourscore. And before I go out the door, as a non sequitur, one more dance with her, and I'll mix us a nice metaphor. So much hangs on that first lunch at Doc's. If she'd looked at me and said, "I'm sorry, but I can't stay long. I have to meet a friend," it would have left a deep canyon in my life. But she was very cheerful and had a good appetite and talked about her recent orchestra tour of South Asia and the climb up a steep hill to a temple and the monkeys who were adept at picking the tourist pockets. And lunch lasted for 3 hours, and here's the result. A loving partnership of two independents with a few crises resolved and steering a steady course. The love affair, the daughter, the 30-year history, all hang on a 2-minute phone call, she on 102nd, me on 90th. Mine was a landline, the phone with a curly cord on the pantry wall. I was ready to leave New York and go live in the woods of Wisconsin. I'm not a New Yorker. I don't have enough opinions. I'm not picky about food. And if someone mentions Taylor Swift, I wouldn't say, "Let me tell you about the time I met Taylor Swift," even if I had met her. But here I am, residing, paying taxes, a Metro card in my billfold, a registered Episcopalian, thanks to her. You don't find a violinist in the personals who's looking for an older lover, preferably a grim-faced writer with nondescript hair. It's pure luck. I walked to 83rd to mail some letters and pass couples dining under awnings on the sunny side of the street. Green markets with their goods out on wooden pallets. No alleys here, so everything happens out on the street. Goods are trucked in, garbage out. You're walking along a loading dock with flower boxes. Elders perch on the brownstone steps and gaze on me with a judicious eye. But they see little kids come trotting along and their hearts melt. I pass a little Victorian firehouse, one truck wide, wedged in the row of brownstones holding off the invasion of high-rise condos. A papa stands on the corner, embracing one tall daughter, then the other, both carrying gifts, heading for a party. Skateboarders swoop along the bike lane, helmeted kids on scooters. Brisk walkers passing us, amblers. People walking their dogs who watch for other dogs to talk to. The sun is out and there is good feeling everywhere I look. There are writers in this neighborhood busy writing accusatory memoirs or nonfiction about heinous acts by vicious men, so it's up to me, a tourist, to pay witness to public happiness. The old couple feasting on fettuccine in the sunshine. The guardian elders, the proud papa, the gallant skateboarders. It's the human comedy where people are linked by friendship and family. The weak are protected. Venality is resisted. And the ordinary is relished.